Luke 5, verse 1 to 11. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Luke 5, verse 4. The fluorescent hum of the office lights was the soundtrack to my professional life, a steady, uninspiring drone that had accompanied me for years. My name is Claire, and at 34, I was a seasoned veteran in my company's marketing department, yet perpetually overlooked, an unsung workhorse tethered to the same stable. Every morning, I'd arrive with a fresh surge of determination, armed with strategies, innovative ideas, and an unparalleled work ethic. I'd toil, I'd strategize, I'd pour my heart into every project, convinced that this time, my efforts would finally translate into the recognition, the promotion, the financial remuneration I so desperately sought. But each evening, I'd leave with an invisible bucket, empty and clanging. It felt like I was perpetually casting my net into the vast, indifferent ocean of corporate ambition, only to pull it back empty, time and time again. I knew the currents, understood the market, collaborated with the best, and yet nothing. It wasn't for lack of trying. I was the first to volunteer for challenging projects, the last to leave when deadlines loomed, and my presentations were meticulously crafted, often receiving praise from colleagues, if not from the decision makers above. But praise, I'd learned, didn't pay the bills or advance my career. My personal life mirrored this professional frustration with a disheartening precision. As a Christian woman, I had always believed in God's perfect timing and provision, not just for my career, but for a life partner. I'd prayed, I'd dated, I'd tried online apps, met friends of friends, even braved a few singles events at church. Each encounter was a fresh cast of the net, full of hopeful anticipation, only to return with the same hollow emptiness. Conversations would fizzle, connections wouldn't ignite, and the few promising sparks would quickly extinguish, leaving me more bewildered than before. It felt like I was perpetually scrubbing away at the grime of failed expectations. Much like the fishermen in the gospel story that had always resonated with me, washing their nets after a night of futile labor. I understood their weariness, their quiet despair as dawn broke, revealing only the vast, empty expanse of the sea. One particularly grueling Thursday, the news landed like a lead weight in my gut. Mark, a colleague who had joined the team 6 months after me, and whose contributions, to be frank, were often less substantial than mine, was promoted to senior marketing manager, the role I had explicitly expressed interest in, the role I had been subtly, and not so subtly, grooming myself for. My manager, Miss Davies, offered a perfunctory congratulation to Mark during our morning huddle, then glanced at me with a fleeting sympathetic smile that felt more patronizing than comforting. "Claire, you're doing great work," she'd said later, pulling me aside. "Just keep at it. Your time will come. My time will come." The phrase echoed in the empty chamber of my heart. How many times had I heard that? How many times had I told myself that? My time hadn't come. It was always someone else's. That evening, I didn't just feel weary. I felt utterly defeated. I drove home, the city lights blurring through a haze of unshed tears. My small apartment, usually a sanctuary, felt like a cage. I walked straight to my kitchen, then stopped. My gaze fell upon the neatly stacked pile of business books on my counter. The 7 Habits, Lean In, Grit, Hustle Harder. I picked one up, its glossy cover mocking me. Hustle harder? I was already hustling so hard I was losing sight of why I even bothered. I looked at my phone, a dating app notification blinking innocently. I opened it, scrolled through a few profiles, and then, with a sigh, pressed delete. Not just the notification, but the entire app. It felt symbolic, a cleansing, a surrender of my own futile strategies. This was my washing the nets moment. I was ready to give up. Not on work entirely, but on my way of working, my way of searching, my way of living. I sank onto my couch, the silence of my apartment amplifying the quiet desperation in my soul. "God," I whispered, the words ragged. "I don't know what else to do. I've tried everything. I'm empty." It was in that space of complete surrender, that utter emptiness, that Jesus stepped in, not with a dramatic bolt of lightning or an audible voice, but with a profound, quiet shift in my spirit. The next Sunday, the sermon at church was on Luke 5, verse 1 to 11, the very story of the fishermen I had been contemplating. As Pastor David described Peter and his partners toiling all night, catching nothing, I felt a sharp, almost physical pang of recognition. He spoke of their exhaustion, their frustration, their decision to wash their nets, ready to call it a day, ready to abandon their efforts. Then he described Jesus coming to the shore, borrowing Peter's boat to preach to the crowds. He asked for Peter's boat, Pastor David emphasized, his livelihood, his space, his comfort zone. And Peter, despite his weariness, yielded it. My mind immediately went to my boat, my job, my career aspirations, my longing for a partner, my very life. Had I truly yielded it, or was I still holding on to the oars, convinced I knew the best direction? After the sermon, Pastor David invited anyone who felt like they were toiling all night to quietly reflect and pray. I closed my eyes, and in that moment, I felt a deep, piercing truth. I had given God my prayers, my tithes, my Sundays, but had I really given him my methods, my strategies, my control? The honest answer was no. I was still piloting my own boat, occasionally asking for directions, but ultimately convinced I knew the best fishing spots. Then came the strange instruction. Pastor David concluded with Luke 5:4. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." And then Peter's response, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." The word struck me with the force of a revelation. Because you say so, I will let down the nets. Not because it made sense, not because it was the logical next step after a night of failure, but simply out of obedience to the Master. Over the next few days, I wrestled with what launching out into the deep meant for me. In my career, it certainly didn't mean pushing harder in the same old way. It meant something different. I felt an undeniable nudge towards a project that seemed utterly unglamorous, almost like wasted effort, reorganizing the company's internal digital asset management system. It was a tedious, back-end task that no one wanted, a system that caused more headaches than it solved, and certainly not a path to promotion. My colleagues actively avoided it. It was deep water, unfamiliar, unrewarding in the conventional sense, and far from the flashy, client-facing projects I usually gravitated towards. But because I felt God's gentle, persistent leading, I decided, because you say so, I will. I approached Miss Davies and, to her surprise, volunteered to tackle the digital asset system. She was skeptical. "Claire, that's a huge undertaking, and frankly, it's not a priority right now for new initiatives." I reiterated my commitment, explaining that I believed a more efficient system would ultimately save the company time and resources. She shrugged, gave me a lukewarm approval, and an impossible deadline. For the next 2 months, I immersed myself in it. I spent evenings and weekends learning new software, digging through mountains of disorganized files, and creating a framework for a more intuitive, searchable system. It was grueling, solitary work, often met with blank stares when I tried to explain its importance to colleagues. There was no glory, no visible path to promotion, just the quiet, persistent grind. It felt like I was casting my net into the dark, silent depths, trusting that something would happen, even when every logical indicator pointed to futility. Around the same time, the strange instruction for my dating life was equally counterintuitive. I had stopped actively searching. I deleted all the apps, politely declined offers for blind dates that felt like obligations, and instead focused on deepening my relationship with God and serving in my church community. I started volunteering more at the local soup kitchen, something I'd always wanted to do but didn't have time for. I joined a women's Bible study group, not to network for a potential partner, but simply to grow in my faith and build genuine friendships. It was a conscious choice to step back from controlling the outcome and trust that God owned the hearts of men and would direct them as He chose. This felt like deep water in a different way, letting go of my own timelines, my own preferences, and simply trusting His sovereignty. Then, the breakthrough came. Slowly at first, then with an overwhelming rush that felt like a net-breaking, boat-sinking catch. The internal digital asset system, once a chaotic mess, began to hum. Other departments, initially resistant, found their workflow streamlined. Projects that used to take days of file searching now took hours. Unbeknownst to me, my efforts had caught the attention of not just my department, but the entire corporate office. The CEO, Mr. Harrison, a man I had only ever seen in company-wide emails, sent out a memo praising the innovative internal restructuring initiative led by Claire Peterson in marketing. Soon after, I received an email asking for a meeting with Mr. Harrison himself. My heart pounded. I expected a pat on the back, maybe a small bonus. What I got was an offer that stunned me. Mr. Harrison proposed creating a new company-wide role, Director of Digital Operations and Workflow Optimization. It was a position with a significant salary increase, a team to manage, and a mandate to implement similar efficiency improvements across all departments. "Claire," he said, his voice firm but appreciative, "you've demonstrated a vision and an ability to execute that we desperately need. You saw a problem no one else wanted to touch, and you solved it. You launched out into the deep and you found something truly valuable." It was a net-breaking moment. The responsibilities were immense, the scope overwhelming. I literally had to beckon to my partners for help, immediately hiring 2 new people to assist me in building out the new department. My boat wasn't just full. It felt like it was sinking from the sheer weight of the unexpected blessing. It was the same company, the same sea where I had toiled for years with empty nets, that now yielded an unimaginable harvest. And the boat-sinking blessings didn't stop there. Through my volunteer work at the soup kitchen, I met David. He wasn't the typical type I would have sought out on an app. He was a quiet, unassuming engineer, focused on his faith and serving others. Our conversations were easy, genuine, filled with shared values, and a deep respect for God. There was no pretense, no game playing, just an authentic connection that felt divinely orchestrated. We bonded over our mutual desire to make a difference in the community, and before I knew it, our friendship blossomed into a profound, undeniable love. It felt like God had taken the hearts of men and directed one straight to me, enriching my life in a way I had stopped actively pursuing, but continued to trust Him for. My frustration had indeed become my fruitfulness. My relaunch was real, tangible, and far beyond anything my own strategies could have ever produced. I realized then the profound truth of the scripture. God owns the sea, and He directs the fish. He owns the earth, and He directs the people. He owns the hearts of men, and He directs them for our blessing, for His purpose. The whole experience drew me in, not just to a new career path or a loving relationship, but to a deeper understanding of my calling. From catching fish in the corporate world for my own ambition, I felt a new sense of purpose, to use my influence, my blessings, and my story to become a fisher of men. To share how yielding my boat to Jesus, how obeying His strange instruction to launch into the deep, led to a life of abundance and purpose I couldn't have imagined. When all my human strategies proved abortive, I didn't push harder as the motivational speakers often advised. I stepped back. I listened to the Master. I launched out into the deep, into the uncomfortable, the unconventional, the unglamorous, and He rewarded me in ways that continue to humble and amaze me. My net-breaking, boat-sinking relaunch was a testament to His faithfulness, a beacon for anyone who feels they are toiling through the night, pulling in empty nets. All you need is just to allow Him in your space for a bit, and He's up with a great reward. Reflection. Am I weary from trying in my own strength? Have I yielded my boat to Jesus, trusting Him to direct the fish into my net? Prayer, Lord, I yield my boat to You. Use my life, my work, and my ministry. Turn my place of frustration into a place of breakthrough, that I may bless others too. Amen. Have a blessed week.